I want you to meet one of today's top actors from Australia. Marta Dusseldorp is gaining international recognition for her roles in a number of TV series. One of these is set in a farming town in Australia 60-some years ago, and it's quickly becoming a hit all around the world. The star of A Place to Call Home tells us what she loves most about the place she calls home in Sydney. We're at 877-333-7425. It's Travel with Rick Steves. Audiences in the United States are beginning to recognize what Australians have known for years. That actress Marta Dusseldorp is a delight to watch, both on stage and on screen. She also seems to be one of Australia's busiest actors. Right now, she's starring in 3 newly released TV drama series. She plays the title role of a high-powered attorney in 2 seasons of Janet King, and she has a leading role in the Jack Irish detective shows. But starring in the lavish drama series A Place to Call Home is what's building her international following. The series is set in rural Australia in the volatile post-war 1950s. The episodes explore the era's evolving issues of national identity and prejudices. Marta's character, Nurse Sarah Adams, returns home to Australia from Europe after surviving the horrors of a Nazi prison camp. We caught up with Marta in between filming dates at the ABC studios in Sydney to find out more about her role in A Place to Call Home and also what she enjoys most about Australia today. Marta, welcome to Travel with Rick Steves.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Well, congratulations on your success. I understand A Place to Call Home is a huge hit in Australia, and now it's getting more and more airtime on public television in the United States.
Absolutely. It's got a huge fan base over in America. There's all sorts of Facebook pages and Twitter and followers, and the fans have had a huge influence actually in making this show continue, certainly in this country. But I found out yesterday it's sold to 120 countries around the world.
A Place to Call Home, and it really gives us a look at 1950s Australia. You know, in the United States, we're coming off this frenzy about Downton Abbey, which takes us intimately into the fascinating world of English aristocracy a century ago. Your series takes us to Australia in the age we think of as Eisenhower and Leave It to Beaver, and sort of we have a nostalgic, simplistic look at the 1950s, but sort of peeling back the layers. Tell us about Australia in the 1950s.
Well, it was post-war for us. That's how we define it. So there was a depression. People were returning or not. So there was a lot of loss, a lot of shrapnel, emotional shrapnel in people's psyches. A lot of the men disappeared, and so the women had sort of taken over, found a better place for themselves in society and community in the workplace. And it was a time of reconnecting to cultural identity, I suppose. There wasn't a lot of frivolity and celebration necessarily, even though it was a seeming success, because the loss for Australians was so great. So the show starts with a woman returning from overseas, my character, Sarah Adams, having been away from home for a long time. And she had fought in the war and been a Holocaust survivor. And that's all explained in the show as to how that could have possibly happened for her. And she meets this very well-to-do family on the ship on the way back and accidentally falls madly in love with the son who of course, it's not the right match and should never be. And so a war begins outside the war, which is between this family and this woman. It's really a look at where we've been and how far we've come. But what I love about this show, and Bevan Lee, the creator, what he's done, he's set it as a melodrama, and he talks about the Cirque films. So he's referencing a particular genre, and so it's quite heightened. But it's about a deep underlying prejudice and racism and homophobia and those sorts of taboo subjects that we haven't really explored on Australian television necessarily before.
It is interesting that we can look at these hard issues, and we've got the same challenges in the United States, and it sort of disarms us to go back to the 50s and look at it, how it was dealt with in that time, and then to sort of be haunted by the fact that we're still struggling with it today. Talk for a minute, Marta, about the whole idea of the adjustment for a society where women all of a sudden are going to be more respected and at the same time expect more in the 50s. Exactly. I had that sense when I saw you, even when you were sailing from Britain back to Australia after the war in a place to call home, the sense was you were going to march right in there, and this is a new age, and women are going to be respected.
Well, Australia had always been very family-based, women in the kitchen, men out to work. It really had been that way for a very, very long time. And as I say, most of the men left. So the women had to fill those roles. They were pushed out of the kitchen and into the workforce. The thing about Sarah is she comes with also Europe, and surviving Ravensbrück was where she was incarcerated for over 3 years. She's a nurse by trade and had continued after her repatriation to be a nurse in London. And here's a woman who really doesn't need to be the centre of attention, and yet her actions keep putting her in the spotlight because she is selfless, but she marches for the greater good. And so I really enjoyed playing that and ruffling all these feathers, of course, which are in the hats of these amazing costumes in the 1950s. And there's a lot of fun to be had out of it too. It sounds very depressing, but actually there's a lot of joy in watching that happen as someone breaks down the wall, so to speak, on screen at a time when you can't pick up a mobile phone or send a text. You have to arrive and actually have a conversation, which usually means a cup of tea and some Anzac biscuits, which are one of our nation's greatest biscuits, made from the drippings of oats and maple syrup back in the day. So, I mean, certainly when I shoot it, I can smell my grandmother and I can hear her voice and I can hear the radio, and I remember the leftover of that time, the kind of last vestige of that. And certainly it talks to a lot of Australians, and internationally as well, a bit like Downton Abbey, because it's a full absorption in another place, and it's like a different world. It's like travelling. When I travel to Japan, I go, this is like being on another planet. I love it so much because it's so different and so completely other. And that's what this show really is.
And it's just beautifully written and deliciously filmed and wonderful acting. Do you think that a lot of us, it's a hit in Australia in part because Australians are just nostalgic about the 50s, or does it challenge them to see where they are today and where they need to go?
I think both those things. And I think actually what's so unique about this show is that 3 generations sit down to watch it together. Mm-hmm. And that old-fashioned thing of sitting around the fire, then sitting around the radio, then sitting around the television has been returned to families. A lot of people talk about that, how they all sit down together because everyone can watch it and everyone can relate to it. There's 3 generations of women and men playing out their lives. So there's something to recognize for everyone.
What a delight for the older generation to sit down with their grandchildren, and because this can verbalize or help them visualize this reality. And it also artfully deals with a lot of the dark side of sort of a sweet, superficial world that really need to be dealt with thoughtfully.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is Travel with Rick Steves. We're talking with Marta Dusseldorp. She plays Sarah Adams in A Place to Call Home, big hit in Australia, and it's come to the United States on public television, and you can watch it streaming on Acorn Media. Our phone number is 877-333-7425, and Sid's calling from Atlanta in Georgia. Sid, thanks for your call.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment or a thought about A Place to Call Home or Australia in the 50s for Marta?
First, I want to say how much my family is enjoying her nuanced performance in A Place to Call Home. It is one of our favorites. And as a Southern American in the southeastern part of our country, I can't help but be struck by how beautiful the country is and how the rolling hills are part of the landscape and certainly part of the enjoyment one has seeing these actors. I'm also, just as a Southerner, interested in Marta's reaction to how an American traveler to Australia should engage in the Aboriginal history, which is so much a foundation of the country.
Thanks, Sid. The way to come to Australia to engage with the Indigenous community is to search those communities out. And one of the places to do that, of course, is in the Red Centre. If you go to a place called Uluru, which in the old days was called Ayers Rock, but has been renamed its Aboriginal name, certainly there you can visit communities and engage directly with them, and that's always the way to do it. You look for any kind of tourist organisation that is run by those communities so that the money goes directly back to them and you are engaging with them in the way they want to be engaged with. That's the most respectful and usually the most satisfying experiences I've ever had. There's another place called Arnhem Land, which is a very spiritual place for the Aboriginals and is a heritage space, which is theirs alone. And you can organise ways to go in there, you play and see how they live and work and engage. And you can buy their artwork, which is absolutely incredible. And again, that money goes back into the community so that they can sustain their history, their culture, and their storytelling, which is very important to them.
So, Marta, on our theme about 1950s Australia and today's Australia, in 1950s, Australia was more homogenous, and today it's, I think, more multicultural, I would imagine. How was the outlook in the 50s for the Aboriginals compared to today? What was the mindset of the white Australian?
It was devastating. I think there was an extraordinary amount of racism and division. So in the 1950s, it was a complete, really sort of polar opposite to how it is today. There was a lot of, everyone wanted it to be divided. They didn't want to have anything to do with the Aboriginal people. They wanted them to disappear almost. It was, and of course, there was a lot of things in place that sort of tried to help that to happen. Luckily, that didn't happen. And there has been a lot of apology and kind of a real sense of trying to give them back their dignity and their land rights, minimally, and education and health and finding a solution so that everyone can live together. The thing is, they don't want to live as we live. So that it's a really a difficult thing. It's an ongoing political... it's just
are the Aboriginals in Australia nomadic?
They used to be. They used to.
That's a tough adjustment, isn't it?
Yeah, they used to walk their song lines, and so they walked across the country. Their land, if you look at a map of Australia as divided in Aboriginal language and culture, it's completely different to the states that are set out quite rigorously, obviously. So that all had to change because they weren't allowed to anymore. So it's a very painful problem, and it's something that certain individuals have made huge headroads in the Indigenous communities where they've come together and for their children are trying to make some kind of repatriation, trying to find some way to heal it and find a compromise. But it is ongoing, and it's still ongoing today.
It's pretty parallel to the Native American challenges.
Absolutely.
I think it's the same sort of scenario and an ongoing challenge. And we had a different outlook in the 50s, and we certainly have a different outlook today. Yes. We've still got a lot of work to do. To cheer things up a bit, when we think of Australians, we think of shrimp on the barbie and beer and all sorts of just crazy parties. How do you party, and how does an Australian have a good time back in the 50s when you're Sarah Adams on A Place to Call Home?
I don't know. She had many parties. She has a stiff drink with Roy on the veranda occasionally. A bit of home brew goes down.
So where did the shrimp on the barbie come from? I mean, did that exist back in the 50s?
I don't know. Maybe on the coast. I'm still suspect of a prawn, we call them, a prawn or a shrimp inside Australia, within the centre of Australia, I think. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So I only eat seafood when I'm on the coast. And certainly I have had Christmases, because of course our Christmases are boiling hot, where it has just been a shrimp on the barbie and a nice glass of champagne and a salad.
And a salad.
For us.
Oh, that sounds like a little more refined than the Australian parties I've heard. Hey, Sid, you were down in Australia. Well, how did you connect with the people? How did you find the free-spirited Australian?
So fun-loving. We were lucky enough, first of all, to conquer the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I want it on my tombstone. I crossed the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But we were lucky enough to also go into the Hunter Valley for some wine, and also the Blue Mountains, where just fabulous hospitality and an appreciation for all things Australian and from the land. an altogether enjoyable experience.
Nice. Hey, Sid, thanks for your call.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sid. Bye.
One of Australia's favorite actors, Marta Dusseldorp, is sharing her favorite sights in her home country with us right now on Travel with Rick Steves. Marta's work on TV, in theater, and films has been drawing acclaim since the 1990s. She also serves as a Save the Children ambassador to Aboriginal communities in Australia. American audiences can now see her starring in the TV series A Place to Call Home and Janet King. Marta, of course, a lot of us are dreaming of going to Australia, and you live with your family. Where exactly do you live in Australia?
I live right in the centre. I live in a place called Paddington, which is between Centennial Park, Bondi Beach, and the city.
Now that's in Sydney, you mean?
In Sydney, yeah.
Right,
and I can get to any of those places within minutes, so it's spectacular in that way.
So what is Sydney like? Where do you go to enjoy a nice sunny afternoon on a Saturday with your daughters?
Well, I'm very lucky in that my father loves to sail. And when he was very young, his father built a boat here. They're both Dutch men, and a Dutch boat maker came out. So he built a boat, and my grandfather gave it to my dad when he was 18. So it's a very, very old wooden ketch, 32 square footer.
Nice.
And one of my favourite things to do is to go down onto that boat and go for a sail around the Sydney Harbour. It's really the reason I live here, so that I can do that and also go to the beach. It's the most spectacular, with the water glistening, and the Opera House, which I think is one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. And then you sail under the Harbour Bridge, and then you can go all the way back out to the Heads, past Manly. Although when we do and the waves pick up, I'm the first to scream and say, turn it around.
Turn it around.
But that is such a beautiful thing to do.
That's a focus on the great outdoors, it sounds like. It's a beautiful city to be about.
Yeah, and there's not that many boats actually on Sydney Harbour unless something's happening. So sometimes you can be on there alone, which is kind of amazing, apart from the ferries bearing down on you, which for visitors is an absolute must to get on the ferries and go to the different places around the waterfront.
So that's probably a good travel tip, is just hop on those ferries and get out of the city and enjoy the
Absolutely.
Harbour beach.
And you can, of course, depending on your budget, you can charter boats to do that, or you can hop on already tours that are happening. And the more simpler thing I love to do is to go to Centennial Park, which is this beautiful natural reserve right in the centre of Sydney. And it's huge, and you can walk for hours, you can feed black swans, and you can hire bikes and ride around there. So me and the kids often do that. They scooter, and I sort of walk quickly next to them. And you can also horse ride there, which is another beautiful thing to do.
Now, Sid was talking about walking over a bridge. What was that bridge and exactly what happened there?
The Harbour Bridge links the North Shore to the eastern side. And these days, I don't know if I were meant to ask her whether she walked over the top of it, which you can now do, or just along the sort of bridge side of it.
But they're making it more available to pedestrians?
Oh, yeah, it's a huge business walking over the top of the Harbour Bridge. I've never done it. I think because, I see it every day, I tend to go, oh, yeah, there are those people up the top of the Harbour Bridge again. But I've heard it's absolutely incredible.
Sounds breathtaking.
I think it is. And I think better if there's a storm, but...
Yeah, I don't know about that. There's more of Marta Dusseldorp's favorite places to call home in Australia in just a minute. And then get a taste of the sausages of Germany. We're at 877-333-RICK. Marta Dusseldorp's on the line with us from Sydney, Australia, for a look at her favorite places for a getaway in her home country. She's just finishing up filming the 4th season of the drama series A Place to Call Home, where she plays the lead role of Sarah Adams. Even though it was a top-rated drama on Australia's 7 network, it was cancelled during its 2nd season. But viewer demand convinced Foxtel Television to pick it up, so the storyline continues in Season 3 and 4. It's now showing on a select number of public TV stations here in the USA. All seasons of A Place to Call Home, plus Marta's other drama series, are also available at Acorn TV. Erica is calling from Beaver Creek in Ohio. Erica, thanks for your call.
Hi, Rick. Thank you for taking my call. Hi, Marta.
Hi, Erica.
I want to say your making me reminisce about my trip from January in 2015. I came over for the New Year's Eve fireworks and stayed for a glorious 2 weeks. Did not want to come home. And I did do the bridge climb, so...
Tell us about this bridge. And without being too obvious, New Year's Eve in Sydney, Australia is the middle of the summer, so it's nice and hot and everybody's out on the beach. Climbing over the bridge, what's it like, Erica?
It was less strenuous than I was fearing. It takes literally 3.5 hours from start to finish. It's extremely well organized. You have a group of no more than 14, and they take you up, I think it's every half hour or hour. And you go along a certain way, and your tour guide will stop you, explain what you're looking at from your vantage point, give you some history of the city and of the bridge. You go along another little bit, you stop again, and they take your photo at various points. And
are you actually are you roped up?
Yes.
Yes, you're
chained.
You are.
Okay, so
Yes,
this is like a via ferrata, one of those cableways where you've got the carabiners and you got two of them and you go from length to length. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And when you get to the top, they will take your photo, and then you cross to the other side of the bridge and come back down.
Wow.
The other side. So, yeah.
So
it was amazing. I loved it.
And it took about 3.5 hours, and you do it with a guide in a small group. And if you pass out, you can't get hurt because you're harnessed and you're hitched to that cable, right?
Right.
So you're just like a sack of potatoes dangling from that cable, and your guide will then slide you to the end of the bridge.
They actually said, because I asked them about their liability insurance, and they said they've not had an incident, and I think they've been open since 1998.
Yeah, well, so, because you got that if you've got a guide, they make sure your harness is on right, and you have two carabiners, and it's a metal cable, so it's still probably one of the great thrills that you could possibly have as a tourist, and that's a thing to check out while you're in Sydney.
They also do a breath test, just so you know.
So you can't go up with bad breath?
Well, I think for everyone else that'd be good, but no, certainly they check that no one's been drinking or feeling like they might, And you can't have anything in your pockets, isn't that right, Erica, just in case they fall off the bridge onto the traffic below?
That's correct. There are only 5 items you can take. I can only remember what 3 of them are. And like if you're an asthmatic, like your guide will take your spray in their little fanny pack.
So what's the name of the bridge again? I've got to check this out more. What is the bridge?
The Sydney Harbour Bridge.
The Sydney Harbour Bridge. Hey, Erica, while you were there, did you enjoy Australia Day? Were you happen to be there for that?
No, and that was my question. I have an opportunity to possibly go to Melbourne for the Open in January and would be there over Australia Day. Wanted to know if there's a traditional way to celebrate or anything special.
There certainly is. There's always an Indigenous ceremony which is called Survival Day. And usually there's great speeches, wonderful traditional music, food and celebration. So that's in any city. And certainly in Melbourne that'll be happening, probably in Fed Square it's called, which is very close to the Australian Open Stadium. So you can go there.
Is that on the same day every year?
Yes, it is, the 26th.
January 26th. Hey, Erica, are you a fan of A Place to Call Home? Have you been watching the series?
I got a subscription to Acorn TV just so I could watch that show.
And what do you like about it? I mean, it sounds like it's an addictive show. What do you enjoy about it?
I love period pieces, first and foremost, and as Sid mentioned earlier, just the performances. And they do cover topics that you wouldn't necessarily think they would cover straight off the bat. So, a good love triangle and just the social mores of the time and reflecting on how far we may or may not have come since the 50s.
Just great. Hey, Erica, thanks so much for your call.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and good luck on your next trip to the bridge.
Watching.
Yeah. This is Travel with Rick Steves. We've been talking with Marta Dusseldorp, and she's has the lead role, the beloved role of Sarah Adams in A Place to Call Home. And Marta, we're all thinking about Sydney here, but if you want to take a little break from Sydney, what's your favorite place to travel in Australia and why?
My favorite place is Tasmania. It's a tiny little island down the bottom of Australia, down the bottom of the right-hand side, and my husband's from there, so I've been going there with him over the last 13 years. It's still got all the old sandstone buildings from the convict days. It's not very far. You can drive 40 minutes at the most, and you're in the most incredible seaside towns of Cygnet and Franklin. Historically, they're incredibly rich. They've got apples that will explode in your mouth. They have over 40 different types of apples. It's sort of called the Apple Isle for that reason. The food, the people, the calmness, if you can imagine it calmer than Australia already is, it has its own special peace. And it's much colder down there, so it's very crisp and very alive. It has some of the most beautiful national parks, I think, in the world. And you can walk them, the Cradle Mountain Walk and the Abel Tasman Walk along the coast. You can do them via companies, so you stay in huts the whole way, which is pretty nice. Or you can free walk it yourself. But they really are World Heritage walks. And it's one of the most beautiful places I think I've ever been.
It sounds just enchanting. Now, if I'm a big fan of a nostalgic, old-fashioned look at Australia from the 1950s because I start getting into A Place to Call Home, and it inspires me to go to Australia and try to find a quiet eddy from the past, are there any places in Australia where you might feel like you're back in the 1950s?
Maybe in small towns along the way. But not really in the major cities. The Rocks, obviously, in Sydney, which is where the Harbour Bridge is maintained and has historical walks where you can hear the history of each building and how it was built, and again, the sandstone and the convicts. But for me, what Australia really has to offer is the nature. And often these communities that we've been talking about are like, for example, there's a place called Coolgerman, which is at Cape Leveque on the west coast of Australia, right up the top. It's an Indigenous-run place that you can go, and it has 5-star tents and then 2-star huts, so it fits everyone's brief. And it takes a day to drive there, or you can fly there on a small aeroplane. And that really gives you an idea of the remoteness of Australia and how isolated and left alone it really is to the rest of the world. And for me, that's the eddy you're looking for when you come to this place.
Yes.
It can be a place of complete solitude, which when I go to America, I know they also have places like that. But in Australia, they seem almost like you're the only person there. Similarly, in Tasmania, there's a place called Wineglass Bay that you can only walk into. And I remember the time me and my husband went in, there was absolutely nobody there. So we went skinny dipping in the water. And I thought, this is just so extraordinary and not far from a major hub where you can have a beautiful meal and some delicious wine. So I think you're less searching for the 1950s and more searching for that timeless place.
That idyllic eddy.
That Australia offers.
So complement your time in Sydney with that dimension of the great vastness and the peacefulness and the idyllic quality of Australia. Sounds nice. All right. Hey, well, Marta Dusseldorp, you got me fantasizing about Australia. Thanks so much for an appreciation of Australia as well as an insight into your work as Sarah Adams in A Place to Call Home.
My pleasure, Rick. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time to be a long way from home. Some journeys can take you somewhere unexpected. This place, I could call it home.
Season 3 of A Place to Call Home is airing on public TV in a select number of U.S. cities. All of Marta Dusseldorp's latest TV series are also available as DVD sets and streaming video from Acorn TV. They're expecting Season 4 of A Place to Call Home to be released around the holidays.